So we want to thank you all for joining us. And our topic today, how inconvenient is it to keep churches safe? Uh, we titled it this because this is a question um, that we get fairly often, not necessarily this question specifically, but we get questions that have to do with people being inconvenienced. And a lot of people want to know what does it take to keep our church safe, and uh, how much is it going to cost? Just had a conversation yesterday. Somebody wanted to know about background checks and how much that would cost. So we want to ask a couple questions, or I think John is going to pull up some questions that we get asked probably the most often. So, John, thanks for joining in with us, John.
By all means. And yeah, we receive questions quite often, some more frequently asked than others. And we thought it might be a beneficial opportunity for me to ask Jimmy some questions since he's our resident expert in doing walkthroughs in churches. The past couple of webinars we've talked about or tried to make the case that the individuals we are most concerned about, what we're calling the super predators, are those least suspected. And so we thought we would be practical today and allow Jimmy to field some of these questions. He actually does walkthroughs for churches, and he is able to give a different perspective because the mindset of the super predator is such that we want to believe, those of us who are not deviant want to believe there is a safe place where you can finally kind of let down and kind of relax. And unfortunately, in this day and age, though it probably has always been the case, but much more so now, that of all the places that are not safe, ironically, it is in a church building. Jimmy, you and I were talking before we started taping today that it's interesting. You receive a lot of pushback when you do these walkthroughs and you give the suggestions, some of which we're going to get into right now. But there's a lot of pushback to your suggestions as you go in and analyze the safety and security of the church.
Yeah, and they're very simple things too. We're not asking a whole lot of churches. I personally don't think it takes a whole lot of effort to keep our kids safe.
That's right.
It's not. We're not locking. We're not locking our kids away, and
right.
We're not doing voodoo kind of weird, bizarre stuff. It's just very basic, common sense stuff that we do in our home. We do everywhere else except in the church building, and it's just a bizarre phenomenon to me. But we really resist it, or you and I find, I think, resistance in the church culture, and so we'll talk about some of that today.
There you go. So let me ask the first question that we tend to receive a lot. Why should we lock our interior doors at church?
Yeah, so when I do the walkthrough, and by the way, this walkthrough, I kind of developed this thinking that it would be just kind of an add-on to the seminars that we do, and it ended up becoming the most coveted part of the seminars that we do, and it's gained a lot of interest. So that's helped me getting feedback from churches and from survivors. That's really helped me to develop it even further. And so what I do is I walk through the building as a predator would walk through the building. So I actually I get into role and play the part of a pedophile and show people as I do the walkthrough. I usually have a crowd of, I don't know, I've had anywhere from 10 to I've had up to 50 or 60 that shadow me as I do this walkthrough. And I'm basically getting them to get a feel for the building through the eyes of a predator. And I have 20 different areas that I've identified in a building that can be vulnerable places. And so a pedophile is going to exploit one or all of those 20 areas. And it's very easy to do. for the predator, but it's also very easy to counter that as a church. So once you're able to look at your own building through the eyes of a pedophile, you realize, holy cow, this building's actually quite vulnerable. So in that assessment, I'll write up the most problematic areas, and then I'll just tell the churches what they can do to address those areas and to make them much harder for an offender to get access to a child. So it's pretty revealing, but I talk about fire safety in that too. A lot of churches don't even think about it. It's not even on their radar. And so I kind of talk about fire safety as we walk through, and, do you have your exits established? Do you have maps drawn? Do you have fire extinguishers that are easily accessible? Do you have smoke detectors? Those sorts of things. And then I incorporate a little bit into that active shooter kind of safety as well. So I'm not trained in that area. I'm not certified in that area. So it's certainly not my area of expertise, but it at least gets people thinking in those terms in case they have something that's high risk where somebody comes in and begins to threaten. They'll be able to at least think of basic things to do to take action. So yeah, about the doors being locked, I'm a very strong advocate of unused rooms are, if they're open, they're safe places for predators to bring children into there and to rape children. It happens routinely. John and I consult with churches on a regular basis where these guys they're not only taking the kids home into their home or going into the kids' homes, they're actually abusing them during church services. They're taking them into rooms inside the church building, and this is a regular routine practice by predators. And a lot of churches don't believe us until it happens to them, which is very unfortunate. But I can't overstate how many churches we interact with and how many survivors we interact with who tell us that they were sexually abused during church services. And the reason churches don't want to believe that it's happening is because we don't want to believe that we're that, what's the right word? Unperceptive. Is that right? Unperceptive? Non-perceptive?
Right. that we're missing anything. We don't want to what's happening right under our nose.
So one of the things that I got to do for the first time, I actually had a church this past weekend that I visited, which happens very rarely because I'm a full-time preacher. So I'm usually at my home congregation, but I've never gotten to do my walkthrough during a live worship service. And so I had asked permission from the elders at this church, and they thankfully granted permission for me to do my walkthrough during church services. The reason I wanted to do it during a worship service was because it's authentic. Every other time that I've done this, it's been at seminars where I have, a small crowd of people and church is not in session. So, on a realistic level, on a practical level, it's still theoretical in the minds of the people who are walking that path with me. So I was able to film. I got permission to film my walkthrough, and I did it during church services, and it was actually surprising for me just how easy it was to get access to all these rooms. And I had my brother-in-law with me, so they wanted somebody who was from that congregation to be with me. So I had him by my side, and we were walking into rooms, and I was just floating around in the halls, and every now and then I'd pass somebody and they wouldn't even question us. And I was walking into closets and just weird rooms, and nobody ever questioned me. And it just showed how easy it is for predators to do whatever they want. They can take these kids into these rooms, and all they have to do is normalize an event. And even if they do get questioned, they have a perfect perfect excuse for being in whatever room they're in. And so if it's a classroom, they can just say that the kid had a question about the Bible, or they were looking for something. The kid thought that they lost something, and this adult was helping them to find it. If it's in the bathroom, if any suspicions are raised that they were doing anything inappropriate in the bathroom, well, I was just helping the child go to the bathroom. They asked for help, and I was there, so I helped the kid. And so it's normalized opportunities, and it's unbelievable how often are molesting these kids during worship service. And so that's part of the thrill. That's part of the hunt. And so that's what John and I talk about when we talk about super predators. These aren't people who slip up, who make mistakes. I guess a good analogy, and what a lot of people think in terms of, is back whenever we were teenagers and had raging hormones, and the hormones begin to get the best of you, and whatever it is, you see the pretty girl walking down the street and you want to pursue that girl. And we liken the predator to whenever we were teenagers with raging hormones. That's not what we're talking about. These are methodical, patient people who are adrenaline junkies, and part of the thrill is abusing a kid during worship service, because it begins to get boring.
That's right. They have.
You know what I mean?
That's right. They become deviant.
That's right.
We don't like to think in terms of, again, and it's what we've referenced before. We don't like to think in terms of people that cross certain lines, both morally and spiritually, that there's a point of no return. That's probably one of the most controversial topics that we encounter.
Absolutely.
But can someone get to a point where they internally are so different from us that when we give them the benefit of the doubt, we actually then are feeding into a wolf that is in sheep's clothing? You have referenced a professional pickpocket that is on a TED Talk.
Apollo Robbins. Yep, very telling video.
That's right, and it's an excellent example of someone who, and he describes it on that TED Talk, that if you can arrest somebody's attention, then you can be picking them clean. And so we try to make the case that in churches there are individuals that are so depraved and so deviant that they're actually hunting for kids, and they look so normal. These predators look so normal, and that's how they are able to gain our confidence. And then now they're looking to offend a child.
Yeah, and John, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I do quote this a good bit, but in our experience consulting with churches, I usually say that about 85% of churches that we consult with have as their abuser people who are in some sort of a position, whether it's a volunteer position, teaching a class, or whether it's a paid position. So elders, deacons, pastor. I'd say, I've never really written it down and documented it, but it's definitely more than half by a good bit. But my guess is like probably 85%. Would you say that's fairly accurate?
I think that's very accurate. That's right.
And they're not like, the people volunteering or the people on staff who the church has been annoyed with and they want to get rid of. It's their most beloved members. And so what John and I run into very often is this separation of the reality of what the allegations are to their perceived reality of who this person is. Because these, it's unfortunate, but, and I experienced it with my own father. It's people who we look up to. We're never reporting the stranger, or rarely do we report strangers. These aren't robots that we're reporting. They're not emotionless things. these are our best friends, or our coworkers, or our peers. And so when we consult with churches, they have a really difficult time confronting the individual, but then reporting them. That's so challenging for them because they don't want to believe that they've been had.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why, Jimmy, your story, I'm reaching for my iPad here, or my phone, to look at the next question. But that's where your story is so compelling, because if anybody had a reason to doubt what they were hearing, it was you, because it was your own dad. He fulfilled the role of a pastor. He was everybody, but yours is the most profound but classic case of somebody who is in a position for years, gains the confidence of people, but meanwhile he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. We don't like to question the veracity of anybody's salvation, especially within a church context. But look at Judas. But Judas never offended a child. So
Yeah.
it could be that somebody is right in our midst who is a Judas. The Bible speaks clearly to that they will be among us and in church activities, and they'll be the most well respected. So we are shocked when we find out, but this takes it to a new level when we find out that they not only are hypocrites, but that they had designs on hurting children.
Yeah, and I think to close out that first question, you and I were talking a little bit earlier, and I think it's interesting to me that when we developed our policy, and this was after my dad had been arrested, and people knew what he was in prison for, and people from my congregation, they knew. I mean, they knew the level of what he had done and how many victims. I mean, there were over 20 victims that he confessed to, and they were all prepubescent. I mean, he just wreaked havoc on so many lives. And so I developed a church policy and got, my shepherds helped develop that, and gave really good feedback. And so as we developed that, I thought we were going to get all kinds of resistance, and that, because we had to start doing criminal background checks, and we had to do like a vetting procedure for all of our volunteers, and it's pretty intensive policy that we adopted. So we got zero resistance, and I was like, this is kind of surprising. So we got zero resistance until we got to the doors having to be rekeyed. And this can be a segue into another question, but we rekeyed the doors, and I realized very quickly every single room that's open and that's unoccupied and that's unmonitored is a safe haven for abusers. And from talking to my dad and reading mountains of books where all the predators are talking about it, and they're like, it was so easy. Like, we just walked into a room right in front of people and we would rape the kids. Sometimes the predators would intentionally leave the doors open. And I'm reading this stuff, and like, I was in a world of shock at the time. Now it's just, I understand that's second nature for them. It's actually instinctive, and that's part of the thrill. So I'm reading this stuff, and I'm like, man, every single one of our open rooms it's just we're waiting for another kid to be abused. And so I thought it was just something that was so common sense and so simple to just install locks on the interior doors. And if a room's not being used, it's shut and it's locked. And we got all kinds of pushback on that. And people, they didn't understand why we were doing it. And I was being paranoid, and I finally lost my lid, and I should get the tinfoil hat out because I'm just being overprotective and paranoid, and that's in a church where people know what all my dad did. And I don't know. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. And John, you had made the point earlier. We lock our doors at our home, and we just know, like, when you leave the house and your house is unoccupied and it's unmonitored, what do? You turn the lock, you pull the door shut.
Same thing with our vehicles.
That's exactly right. But
So,
inside the church building,
we wouldn't run into a convenience.
Yeah. So that's the biggest reason for the pushback was, you mean that I have to unlock a door in order to enter it? Well, yeah. Same as you do with your car. When you get to your car, you turn the key or push a button, and the doors pop open. When you get to your house, you put the key in the knob and you turn it. When you get to a room in the church building that's locked, whoever has a key, they put it in, they turn it, and they open it. So for me, I was kind of mystified that there was pushback on that, because I thought, this is seriously this is the point where people draw the line and say, okay, you've lost it now. You're a weirdo.
Well, it's interesting because it really does speak to, and Jimmy, you and I were talking about this earlier, it speaks to the desire deep within the human heart to be able to relax somewhere. And we use the term that we're a church family. Little do we realize, though, that desire has clouded our perspective. And it serves as a very good analogy, because how many abusers are within a family? And just as people don't want to believe that somebody within their own home, an uncle, a grandfather,
Sure,
would be down the hall with the kids abusing someone. And again, our goal is not to unnecessarily raise undue suspicions. We don't want people to be uncomfortable in their own, wherever they are, in their own location, whether church or a house. But really what's happened is our own ignorance of the reality of evil, that evil still exists and it's among us, has caused us to do go the polar opposite, which is we turn a blind eye to the possibility, if not the reality, that this stuff is going on. And the kids pay the price. And so being aware, you shall know them by their fruits. So being mindful and being aware and being wise is not being paranoid, but we've thrown the door open to these guys that look for, and they specifically, the worst of the worst, they target churches, and they try to gain the confidence of people. You have mentioned that your dad, as a pastor, used that position to gain the confidence of a father who actually spoke at one of our seminars. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, he's on our website, that videotape. And Dave trusted your dad. Your dad was very methodical, and he was willing to babysit to allow Dave to have some time off. So not only did your dad have access to the kids while they were in church, but he actually was able to find access into this family's home, into Dave's home. And so there is a classic example of the mindset. And it only takes one to wreak havoc on in somebody's life and the lives of kids. And that's really what we're about. And that's what you're about when you do these safety walkthroughs.
Yeah. I mean, it's very basic, very common sense, and it's not tough to do. I mean, we've been doing it now, probably for at least 3 years now at our church building, and to my knowledge, nobody has had a nervous breakdown that they have to unlock a door to enter a room. So it's just so basic and so easy to do.
Well, let me transition. That was really the second question, and so you spoke to that already, which is about the key issue, that something very practical and small like that you receive a lot of pushback for that. We'll transition to the third question, which we've touched on a little bit, but we'll have you elaborate on it. To ask nice person worship with the rest of us. So somebody that has a background, that it's become known that they are either a pedophile, either by virtue of the fact that they are on the registry, which is the most severe. So when we find somebody like that, or somebody that word of mouth, but reliable sources have come forward, because we're dealing with a situation, and Jimmy, you've been on the forefront as far as consulting with a camp, that somebody intimately involved in this camp on a daily basis has now actually came forward. With your help, those on the board were able to confront this individual in such a way. He finally confessed, and there's a lot of frustration now because there are no identified minor victims at the time.
Mm-hmm.
At this time,
right?
There's some victims that are now adults, and they're going to have to seek, if they ever have the strength, they're going to have to come forward and do their own civil suit. But with this guy actually having confessed, it's very, very difficult to pursue things. But yeah, so if somebody is known, or not just suspected, but is known, either by means of the Megan's registry, everybody can go online and see any registered sex offender, or somebody that has confessed, isn't it mean? Isn't it cruel? Isn't it like the Scarlet Letter then for a church to highlight that person and go so far as to suggest they not be in the company of kids in a mixed worship service?
I would say, John, that's probably the number one. I'd put that at the very top of the list. The number one thing that we face radical resistance. This is not like people questioning us and saying, well, where's your biblical foundation for that? Which we have. But I would say it's radical resistance where people think we definitely flipped our lid over that one. Right. And, it's to us, we think that other people have flipped their lids when you think it's okay to put a known predator, child predator, who has multiple victims, sometimes hundreds of victims, and to put them in the company of children in a building and that's, part of the beauty of the walkthrough that I do is for churches that are confident and think, and I've done it in churches that have even the best safety measures in place and the best policies. I can walk through and I can exploit every single vulnerability in that church building within 2 minutes. Give me 2 minutes in a church building that I've never set foot in before. And even if you have what you think is the strongest policy and the strongest security, I can almost guarantee now that I can breach that very easily. And in fact, in a very bizarre way, and I talked to John about this, I felt excitement this past Sunday when I did that walkthrough. It was in a very bizarre, strange way. I wasn't doing anything illegal or unethical. I simply was just walking through the building with the camera and had permission to do so. But I could see how somebody who has actively turned off their conscience, how walking through a church building who thinks, especially, I would pride myself. I'm getting kind of excited thinking about it now. When you put yourself in the mind of a predator, if a church comes back and they're touting that they have the best policy and that, they've implemented this policy that's going to keep their kids safe, the first thing that comes to my mind is challenge accepted. And I'm going to actually be more inclined to offend at that church and to find a kid, because now, John and I were talking about Charles Manson, and I think it's important to reference this. Of course, this article came up that he's in the hospital yesterday. I guess he went in the hospital yesterday, and because
there may have been a technological lapse just for a moment.
Okay.
Start over who you're talking about.
Yeah. So Charles Manson.
There you go.
He went in the hospital yesterday. And and John and I understand this mindset quite well, the mind of a psychopath. But Charles Manson is a classic example. And I went back and read some of his history, just stuff that I'd forgotten about or didn't know about. What's interesting is Charles Manson, to our knowledge, never actually murdered anyone. There were 9 murders that were carried out in a period of a couple days out in LA. And it was people from the quote unquote Manson family. It was this cultic group that he had formed. But he had gotten these men and women to perform all these murders. And so that's intriguing to me, because it would have been much easier for Manson to carry the murders out himself rather than to convince a whole group of people to simultaneously carry out murders all over the city. And so for him, it was out of sheer boredom that he brainwashed all these people to go perform these murders. And I think Manson was so skilled at being charismatic and just swooning people that he thought, challenge accepted. I want these people dead, so I'm going to see if I can convince these other dumb people to do it for me. And he did it. He did it very successfully. And so until we understand that mindset, that people who are charismatic, that are loving, that are compassionate, that, and I don't know that Manson really fit that, but I was reading some of his history, and I know that he's been paroled on at least one occasion because he became the model inmate. And you look at that and you're like, for John, who worked in the prison, that's expected of your highest risk pedophiles, your SVPs, your sexually violent predators. It's a given that they're going to be the model inmates. And why is that? Have they learned their lesson? John, you can speak to that. Have they learned their lesson, or is there something else at play?
That's right. And until people understand that, and that's really the first part of the message of the webinars, that somebody the first challenge that we have, the first step that somebody needs to be able to take is understanding. These are not normal individuals. They look normal, but normal in terms of conscience. And that's what they count on. They count on those of us that are not deviant. They count on us giving them the benefit of the doubt and us not catching on what they're like on the inside. And as you were talking, Jimmy, a good analogy came to mind. The question is, the times that we have seen those really bizarre situations at some of the larger zoos throughout the U.S. And I just saw another picture the other day, and I don't know when it happened, but we're all familiar with the woman who jumped into the polar bear enclosure, right? And what happened to her? I think most of us saw, she's being pulled up and the polar bear is grabbing her pants and trying to have an hors d'oeuvre. And the question is this: what went through the mind of that woman? We all think she's crazy, but somehow she was lulled into believing that the nice fluffy polar bears
are nice and fluffy.
Right, and maybe it was the ball that was floating in the water, lulled her into believing that these are tame animals because she doesn't see blood on their fur, and harbor seals, or whatever kind of seals, shredded all over the enclosure. And because of her mindset, she gave these polar bears the benefit of the doubt, and so her behavior followed suit. That she's going to jump in and she's going to have the ability to cuddle up next to these animals. And, the analogy falls apart at some point in time because we say, well, that's silly, she should know. But if you look at the heart of a polar bear, if you look at the heart of a wild animal, it's different. You can't domesticate these animals, and so they can't become pets.
But I think it even goes beyond heart, and Peter speaks to that. Peter uses the word instinct.
There you go.
And Jude as well. Jude pretty much repeats what Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 2. And you know, Peter's using this animal analogy, and he's talking about instinct. He said, you know, it's this.
That's right.
They were born for this destruction. It's this instinct of nature where they just like, it's so weird. I'm telling you, when I did that walkthrough, when you think like a predator, it just becomes instinct. And I got to one room that was locked, and this church building that I was in on Sunday had all kinds of open rooms. I mean, just crazy how many open rooms there were. And I get to one room, and I said, oh, I finally got to a room that's locked. And I look up, and hanging above the door is a key. And so I reached up, and, you know, I tilted my cell phone, and I followed, and the camera didn't catch this, but I was actually smiling. Like, it's so weird, but when you get in that mentality, you're like, you know, thinking in your mind, these people think that they kept this room locked and safe, the one room that I find that's locked, and there's a key hanging above the door. And so I grabbed the key and I walked, and it just, for predators, for SVPs, for sexually violent predators, go on the registry. If you look at the registry for these sex offenders that are in your churches, we can almost guarantee that they're a tier 3 sex offender. These are the people who are coming into the church. Tier 3 is your highest level, your highest risk. They're the high intensity people. It's instinct. It's instinct for them to want to find these places with the most vulnerable, with the most amount of little lambs that they can devour. And where do you find that? You find it in the church.
Sure. And Jimmy, it's not just in the church, and a good analogy, but these will target the church. But maybe the closest analogy that can help wake people up is, we may have people watching this webinar right now, this video, who have somebody that they've entrusted into their home, who has offered to babysit, has offered to watch the kids, or during family gatherings. They're the ones that seem to be the most willing to entertain the kids down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
And if that can happen in our own homes, I mean, how many people have you and I dealt with in counseling sessions that are the victims of a family member that molested them? And when you hear the story, it was the uncle, it was the grandfather, it was the stepfather. Again, we're not trying to create paranoia, but how many people have we heard from? And the vast majority of women, or we'll say a significant number of women, but 40% is conservative, have been molested. And when you hear those stories, it was, they were put into the care of somebody that the mother or the parents trusted, and they did not know that just 25 feet down the hallway, their kid was being molested during a family gathering. And nobody suspected. And even today, right, how many victims have not come forward about family members? Now, that's somebody within a home, and those aren't SVPs. So we take somebody who has become inverted morally and has become reprobate and an apostate, and they will look for churches. And just as molestation then takes place in a home, this is a smorgasbord. They specifically target churches, and they will do exactly as you're talking about. They will, it's the thrill of the hunt. And we don't want to believe that, because it's a different mindset.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, and it really complicates things when you know the person, or you think you know the person, because we think we're good people readers. Sure. And Anna Salter has a great chapter on that in her book, Predators. But she talks about how we think we're really good at reading people, and we can tell if somebody's lying. And she talks about how that's a myth. And even the best profilers in the FBI only have, I forget what the degree of accuracy is, but it's not very good. If I remember right, I mean, it was low. I don't remember exactly, but it seems like something somewhere around maybe 15% is coming into my brain, but it's not good. So even the best professional profilers are not good at reading people who are sitting at a table across from them. And so, I think the polar bear analogy is a good one, because what we see is on the outside, and we think of, the cute little Coca-Cola commercials. When you're talking about the little fluffy polar bear, that's what came to my mind. I was like, look at all these Save the Polar Bear agenda-driven commercials that paint them as these little teddy bears that are cute and cuddly, and their little ice glacier is melting away, and you start to form this empathy for this polar bear, and that's the intention of those commercials. And so in our mind, we're just wired and programmed to think that they're these innocent little teddy bears that are soft and cuddly.
That's right. We project onto them something that's very, very different. As a matter of fact, I forget, somewhere in Canada, you can go see the polar bears up close and personal, but you go out in these vehicles that are probably 25 feet off the ground. They have, these huge tires that are on dump trucks. And I've seen pictures of them that they're just below the glass. Everybody's looking out. And it's almost tempting, I can imagine, for somebody to, if you could, to roll one of these windows down and to pet the bear.
Yeah.
Because they're so nice. The bear's up on its tippy toes, checking these people out.
Wagging their little nubbin.
They look like domesticated pets. They're so cute. But then, as you were talking, we were describing that, I also thought of Bernie Madoff, that, head of NASDAQ, and he made off with how much money, that, the world is predicated upon trust, social contract. But we don't want to believe that they are among us. But the last place we want to believe, we understand the joke about used car salesmen, about bankers, about people in politics and Wall Street. Yet we still are willing to we have to be willing to trust somebody with our money. Fiduciary responsibility. We tend to have less tolerance for that. So if somebody rips the church off of money, we won't put them in a position of being on the elder board with finances. But when it comes to this issue, we will give somebody the benefit of the doubt, because we don't want to believe, again, that somebody is an actual perpetrator looking for their next victim. So to raise the question again, we don't want to believe that somebody, quote unquote, can never get better, and therefore they're always a threat in a mixed congregation setting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, the more I do this and the more we consult with churches, the more I'm fully convinced of that. I thought maybe a few years ago, that was maybe a little bit of a harsh stance, and, maybe a little bit overreactive. And now, we've just consulted with so many churches, and you just see these guaranteed patterns where Peter's absolutely right. Like instinctive creatures, they come back and they revel in the daylight. Peter just nails it dead on. And you read 2 Peter chapter 2, and if you really take time and parse that, it's interesting too. It's in the context of sexual sins, and it's these predators who are preying on these unsuspecting women. And the way that Peter talks about them, it's not nice. Peter doesn't have any kind words. There's certainly not even a sprinkle of grace mixed in his words. And you look at that and you say, why is that Peter's reaction? Until you understand that mindset. And so, John and I, the more we consult with churches, and the more we interact with the elders and listen to what these predators are doing when they're confronted. If you think they're going to leave the church, if you think that they're going to be okay with being separated from children, you're sadly mistaken. They're going to fight it, and they're going to fight it hard. And we've had everything from predators threatening to shoot up congregations to, I mean, all kinds of stuff. I mean, they're just radically opposed. I mean, who do you think you are to tell me that I can't worship and be around these kids? And it's sad, but we fall for it. Well, we don't fall for it, but we see church leaders that fall for it all the time. So anyway, I wanted to read a couple of these quotes. I wrote these down, but these were from some Charles Manson interviews. And these were in the past, but they had asked him, sorry for the sunlight. Sun keeps coming out. I like the darkness.
Yeah, that's right. Jimmy, preface that again. There's a little tech issue again. So
yeah. So it's the Charles Manson. He was interviewed a few years ago, and I think some of these are probably pretty old, but it's pretty telling. And I wanted to read these two quotes from him. The one they asked him, does he feel guilty for these being responsible for these murders? His response, there's no need to feel guilty. I haven't done anything I'm ashamed of. And then this other quote, they'd asked him if he was remorseful. Kind of the same question, just asked a little differently. He said, remorse for what? You people have done everything in the world to me. Doesn't that give me equal right? I can do anything I want to you people, anytime I want, because that's what you've done to me. And you just look at the bold arrogance and 9 people's lives lost. The one actress who he had murdered was 5 months pregnant. And they wrote in blood on her house, they wrote pig. And so are you remorseful? His response, remorseful for what? Do you feel guilty? Guilty for what? And so until you understand that mindset, and that people who intentionally harm children and sexualize them and rape them, if you think there's remorse, we're just telling you you're being deceived.
That's right. And with Charles Manson, it's easy to dismiss him because he looks like a freak. You know,
yeah.
I'll say the word, none of us want to. It's easy, right? He's just freakish looking. We all know that.
Yeah.
But we don't understand that the mindset is still there in the white collar psychopath, the bloodless crimes. And we can sort of understand Bernie Madoff sort of making off with money. But when it comes to the damage that is perpetrated upon kids by sexually deviant individuals that look so normal, that's the area of concern that we try to address.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've had enough time here, and hopefully we adequately address these. But long story short, it's not really that inconvenient for churches to implement safeguards to keep kids safe. It's not. We're not asking people to do anything that's radical or that's hard. You just have to follow through with it. And unfortunately, I think at least in the near future, we're going to continue to face resistance to these safeguarding measures. But I don't know. Hopefully, eventually, the culture will shift. And I think it's going to be parents and not church leaders who are the ones who rise up and put their foot down and say, it's time we do something to keep our kids safe.